In the quiet suburbs of Riverstone Heights, behind the facade of perfect lawns and pristine lives, a secret brewed so dark and twisted that no one could have imagined the horror waiting to unfold. Emily Blake had always been the charming one, the successful one, adored by everyone around her. But beneath that charm lay a secret that would soon unravel a web of betrayal, deceit, and death. It all began when Emily's twin sister, Eliza, returned home after years of being estranged from the family. On the surface, it was a happy reunion, smiles, hugs, and old memories shared over dinner. But the tension between Emily and Eliza was palpable. No one knew the real reason Eliza had disappeared all those years ago. Not until now. Daniel Harris, Emily's devoted husband, was caught in the middle of it all. He had married into what he thought was the perfect family, but the deeper he was pulled into their world, the more he realized that the Blake sisters were anything but ordinary. Late-night arguments, mysterious phone calls, and unexplained absences plagued their home. And Daniel, though loyal to Emily, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Eliza, who had always been the wild one, didn't just come back to rekindle old ties, she came back for revenge. She knew something that Emily had kept hidden for years, something that could destroy the perfect life Emily had built. And she was willing to use that knowledge, no matter the cost. But it wasn't just a family feud. It went deeper, much deeper. Secrets that had been buried for decades were about to resurface, and the Blake family was at the center of it all. When Eliza discovered that Emily had been having an affair with none other than Gregory Dalton, their mother's longtime lover, things took a deadly turn. You see, Rebecca Blake, their mother, was no stranger to manipulation herself. She had groomed her daughters to believe that love was power, and power was everything. Rebecca had used her influence to keep Gregory in line for years, but when Emily began an affair with him, the careful balance she had maintained started to collapse. Eliza, enraged by the betrayal, set out to destroy not just Emily, but everything she held dear. But Emily wasn't going to go down without a fight. Desperate to protect her perfect life, she took drastic measures that would change the Blake family forever. The affair with Gregory wasn't just about lust, it was about control. Emily had learned from her mother how to manipulate, how to pull strings from behind the scenes, but she didn't anticipate how far Eliza would go to bring her down. One fateful night, the tension between the sisters reached its breaking point. In a confrontation that neither would walk away from unscathed, truths were revealed, and blood was spilled. But the real shock came when it was discovered that Eliza hadn't been acting alone. She had a partner in her plans for revenge, someone no one would have suspected. The aftermath was more than just a scandal, it was a tragedy. A family torn apart, secrets exposed, and a legacy of deceit that stretched back for generations. But what no one could have predicted was the final twist, a twist that would leave everyone questioning what they thought they knew about the Blakes. Rebecca, always the puppet master, had orchestrated the entire thing. Her daughters had been nothing more than pawns in her twisted game of power and control. And now, with both Emily and Eliza out of the picture, Rebecca stood victorious, her reign over the Blake family more secure than ever. But as she stood over the wreckage of her daughters' lives, a chilling smile crossed her face, because this was exactly how she had planned it all along. The night Emily confronted Eliza was supposed to be the turning point, but no one could have predicted the horrific outcome. Tension filled the air like a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode. The scene was set. Emily had arranged to meet Eliza at their mother's house, thinking it was her chance to finally rid herself of her sister's looming presence. She was ready to do whatever it took to protect her carefully crafted life. But Eliza had other plans. As soon as the door creaked open, Emily felt that the air was charged with something dangerous. Eliza stood in the dimly lit living room, her eyes burning with rage and resentment. "Do you think I don't know everything?" Eliza spat, her voice sharp as a knife. "You thought you could take Gregory from me? You thought you could have it all? Well, not anymore, Emily." The weight of those words crushed the air from Emily's lungs. Gregory wasn't just her lover, he was her key to maintaining the power and status that their mother had drilled into them since childhood. But this wasn't just about Gregory anymore. This was about control. Emily had learned from the best. Rebecca had taught her daughters that power was everything, and if you wanted to survive, you had to be willing to do whatever it took. "You're delusional," Emily fired back, her voice steady but her heart racing. You think you can waltz back in here after all these years and take everything from me? You're the one who ran away, Eliza. You left, and now you want to tear apart the life I built." Eliza's laughter echoed through the room, cold and cruel. "You think this is about you? You never even realized what was happening, did you? While you were busy playing perfect wife and having your secret little trysts, you never saw the real game being played." Before Emily could respond, Eliza stepped closer, her eyes locked on her sister's. "I wasn't the only one betrayed," she whispered, a sinister smile creeping across her face. "You thought Gregory was yours, but he's been mine from the beginning. He came to me, Emily, not you." Emily's heart plummeted as the realization hit her like a freight train. Gregory had never been hers. He had been playing both sides, just like their mother had always done. The betrayal sank deep, twisting the knife already lodged in her heart. But there was more. Eliza wasn't done. "You never understood why I left, did you?" Eliza's voice softened for a moment, almost sorrowful. "I left because I had no choice. Because if I stayed, I would have done something I couldn't take back. You never knew the truth, and now it's too late." Emily, her composure slipping, demanded, "What truth, Eliza? What are you talking about?" But before Eliza could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Both sisters turned to see Rebecca, their mother, standing in the shadows, watching silently as her daughters tore each other apart. Her presence was commanding, as always. She didn't need to say a word. Her cold, calculating eyes said everything. She had orchestrated this moment, and now she was ready to let the final pieces fall into place. Rebecca stepped forward, her voice smooth and chilling. "You both disappoint me," she said, her eyes flicking between her daughters. "You were supposed to be stronger than this. Instead, you let yourselves be consumed by weakness. I raised you better than that." Eliza's gaze hardened as she looked at their mother. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" she hissed. "You wanted us to destroy each other, just like you've been doing all these years." Rebecca's smile was icy. "Power is only worth having if you know how to use it. And neither of you understood that. You let your emotions control you, instead of controlling them. That's why you'll never win." Emily, still reeling from the revelations, could barely process what was happening. The web of lies and betrayal was so thick, she felt like she was suffocating. But she knew one thing: she couldn't let Rebecca win. Not again. As the sisters stood facing their mother, both of them knew there was no turning back. The decades of manipulation, betrayal, and hidden agendas had led them to this very moment, and only one of them would walk away from it. Rebecca's chilling gaze scanned her daughters, and the silence that followed felt like an eternity. Both Emily and Eliza knew this wasn't just a battle between the two of them, it was a final reckoning with their mother, the puppet master who had controlled them their entire lives. The tension was suffocating, the weight of years of lies pressing down on all of them. "Is this it?" then Eliza asked, her voice thick with rage and sorrow. "After everything, this is how it ends, with you watching us tear each other apart like some twisted game." Rebecca didn't flinch. "You always misunderstood, Eliza. This was never a game. This was survival. The world doesn't care about you unless you make it care. You either control or you're controlled." Emily felt the words sting deep in her soul. Her mother had always preached this cruel philosophy, molding her daughters into tools for her own ambition. She'd taught them that power wasn't inherited, it was taken. And Rebecca had made sure to take everything from her daughters except their will to fight. "I won't let you win," Emily whispered, barely able to contain the fury rising within her. "I won't let you destroy us any longer." Rebecca tilted her head, a cold smile forming on her lips. "And what will you do, Emily? You've always been so predictable, trying to protect your precious little life, your reputation, your lies." Her voice dripped with venom. "You think you're strong enough to challenge me?" The room seemed to close in, the walls of their family secrets suffocating them. But then, Eliza stepped forward, her fists clenched, eyes burning with determination. "We're not your pawns anymore, Mother." The air between them crackled with electricity. Emily and Eliza, for the first time in years, stood together. They had been rivals, enemies even, but now they saw clearly the real enemy had always been standing in front of them. It was Rebecca, the woman who had poisoned their lives with her ruthless ambition and manipulative games. "What are you going to do?" Rebecca asked, her voice mocking. "You're both too weak to stop me." Emily's heart raced. She had spent her entire life under her mother's control, but now, standing beside her sister, she felt something she hadn't in years resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her sister, for the life she had been denied, for the freedom from the shadow of their mother's tyranny. Eliza's gaze shifted to the fireplace, where an iron poker lay within reach. Her hands trembled, but her mind was clear. For years she had carried the weight of betrayal, of abandonment, of being forced out of her own life by her mother's manipulation. But not anymore. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't be controlled. "I've had enough," Eliza said, her voice steady as she picked up the iron poker. Rebecca's eyes flickered, but she didn't move. "You wouldn't dare." "You never knew me," Eliza whispered, stepping forward. "You only saw what you wanted to see." The next moments happened in a blur. Eliza lunged, and Rebecca's smirk finally faltered. But before the iron poker could strike, Emily intervened, grabbing her sister's arm, pulling her back. "No," Emily whispered, shaking her head. "We're not like her. We're better than her." The room was filled with heavy breathing, the energy palpable. For the first time in their lives, Emily and Eliza weren't competing for their mother's approval. They were standing together, united against the force that had dominated them for so long. Rebecca, her confidence finally shaken, took a step back. "You think you've won," she spat, her voice losing its edge. "This isn't over. You'll never be free of me." Emily stared at her mother, the woman who had shaped her, broken her, and remade her in her own cruel image. "Maybe not," she said quietly, "but at least we're free of your lies." The sisters turned and walked out of the house, leaving their mother standing alone in the shadow of her own creation. Rebecca's voice echoed after them, but it no longer held the power it once did. They were done. As they stepped into the cold night air, Emily and Eliza felt the weight lift from their shoulders. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in their lives they were in control. And they knew, no matter what came next, they would face it together. The cold night air bit at their skin as Emily and Eliza walked away from the house that had been the source of so much pain. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the driveway, but the two sisters felt lighter than they had in years. For the first time, they were walking away from their past, not as victims, but as survivors. "Where do we go from here?" Eliza asked quietly, her voice still shaking with the adrenaline of what had just happened. Emily glanced over at her sister, a mix of exhaustion and determination in her eyes. "We start over," she said, her voice firm. "We build something new, something that she can't touch, together." Eliza nodded, but the reality of their situation weighed heavily on her. They had no idea what Rebecca would do next. She wasn't the type to let go easily, and they both knew she would come after them. Her daughters weren't just family to her. They were assets, and losing control of them meant losing everything. "Do you think she'll, Yes," Emily cut her off, knowing exactly what her sister was going to ask. "She'll come after us. She always does." Eliza swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" Emily stopped walking and turned to face her sister, the resolve in her eyes unshakable. "We fight back." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything that had come before. But this time they were ready. They had spent their whole lives fighting each other, playing their mother's game. But now, they were on the same side. "We've seen what she's capable of," Emily continued. "We know how she operates. And this time, we're going to be one step ahead of her." Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what was coming next, but for the first time, she trusted her sister completely. They were in this together, and together, they would face whatever came their way. As they walked into the unknown, leaving the dark house behind them, they knew that this was just the beginning. The storm wasn't over, it had only just begun. But they were no longer afraid. The chains their mother had wrapped around them had been broken, and now they were free. For now. Emily and Eliza didn't sleep that night. Their minds raced as they replayed every moment of their lives under Rebecca's control. She had always been the master of manipulation, turning the sisters against each other, using their deepest fears to keep them in line. But this time it was different. They had exposed her secrets, and there was no turning back. Morning came, but the sense of dread only deepened. The sisters sat at the kitchen table of their temporary safe house, staring at the burner phone that Emily had insisted they buy. No one could know where they were, not yet, not until they had a plan. Eliza, we need to make sure she doesn't find us. She's going to come looking, and you know how relentless she can be," Emily said, her voice tight with anxiety. Eliza nodded, gripping her coffee mug as though it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. "I know. She always finds a way to worm her way back into our lives. But this time, I don't think she's going to play by the same rules." Emily leaned forward, her eyes intense. "She's going to try to destroy us, Eliza. Everything we know, everything we love. But we can't let her win." Just as Eliza was about to respond, the phone buzzed, cutting through the tense silence. They both froze. No one was supposed to have that number. Emily hesitated, then picked up the phone. She stared at the screen for a moment before showing it to Eliza. A text message, no name, no number. "You think you're safe? You're not. You never were." Eliza felt a cold shiver run down her spine. It was her. Their mother had found them. How Eliza whispered, her voice trembling. "She always knows," Emily muttered, throwing the phone onto the table with disgust. "But we can't let this scare us. We've come too far." Eliza bit her lip, her heart pounding in her chest. What if we can't stop her? What if this is just the beginning of something worse? Emily looked at her sister, the fear in her eyes mirroring her own. "Then we do whatever it takes to survive." The door to their temporary hideout suddenly rattled, a noise that sent both sisters into a state of heightened panic. They exchanged a glance, fear gripping them both. Could it be? Could Rebecca already be outside, waiting to make her move? Slowly, Emily crept to the door, holding her breath as she peered through the peephole. Nothing, just the wind. But the uneasy feeling lingered. They knew this was only the start. Rebecca wouldn't stop until she had them back under her control, or worse. "She's playing her game again," Eliza whispered. "She wants us to be afraid." Emily clenched her fists. And it's working. But in their hearts, they both knew they couldn't run forever. At some point, they would have to confront their mother. And when that moment came, it would be a fight to the bitter end. The door rattled again, this time, louder. Someone was out there. The rattling at the door grew louder, more insistent. Emily's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. She motioned for Eliza to stay back as she grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. The tension in the room was suffocating, each second dragging out into an eternity. "Eliza, go to the back room," Emily whispered, her voice barely holding steady. Eliza hesitated but nodded, her face pale as she slipped out of sight. Emily stood frozen, her hand trembling as she gripped the knife. Her mind raced, her thoughts a whirlpool of terror and anger. Was it Rebecca? Had she really found them already? The door handle turned, and for a moment, Emily thought her heart would stop. Then came a knock, a soft, deliberate knock that echoed in the silent room. "Emily." "Eliza," a voice from the other side, low and cold. "You can't hide forever." It was her. Rebecca. The woman who had tortured their minds, twisted their hearts, and turned their lives into a nightmare. Emily's grip tightened on the knife, her knuckles white. "What do you want, Rebecca? Why can't you just leave us alone?" she shouted, trying to keep her voice from breaking. A soft, chilling laugh came through the door, sending shivers down Emily's spine. "You know I can't do that. You're mine. You've always been mine." Emily's breath caught in her throat. It was always the same with Rebecca: control, power, manipulation. But this time, Emily wasn't going to let her win. Not again. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," Emily said, her voice trembling but resolute. "You can't control us." The laughter stopped abruptly. There was a heavy silence before Rebecca spoke again, her voice dripping with venom. "Oh, Emily, you think this is about control? No, darling. This is about family, and family doesn't abandon each other, not without consequences." Emily felt a wave of nausea rise in her stomach. Consequences. That was Rebecca's favorite word, her twisted version of love. She had always used it to keep them in line, to threaten and punish them whenever they tried to escape her grasp. And now she was here, ready to exact those consequences. The door rattled once more, the doorknob twisting violently. Emily stepped back, her eyes darting around the room for any escape. But there was none. They were trapped. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, a forceful kick against the door. Emily's body jolted, panic flooding her veins. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to face the monster who had torn their lives apart. "Eliza," she screamed, her voice cracking under the weight of fear. "Run." But before she could move, the door burst open, slamming against the wall with a deafening crash. Rebecca stood there, her eyes wild with fury, her lips curled into a sinister smile. "There's nowhere to run, Emily," she hissed. "Nowhere to hide." For a moment, everything seemed to move in slow motion. Emily saw the madness in her mother's eyes, the years of manipulation, the cruelty that had shaped their entire existence. And in that moment she realized something: Rebecca didn't just want control. She wanted to break them, to destroy them. But Emily wouldn't let that happen. With a scream that came from the deepest part of her soul, she lunged at Rebecca, the knife raised high. She didn't care anymore. She didn't care about the consequences, about the fear, about the pain. All she wanted was to end it, to end her. Rebecca's eyes widened in shock as Emily's rage finally exploded. The knife came down, slashing through the air, but Rebecca was fast. She dodged, grabbing Emily by the wrist and twisting it painfully. The knife clattered to the floor, and Emily let out a gasp of pain. "You always were the weaker one," Rebecca spat, her grip tightening as Emily struggled to break free, "just like your father." At the mention of their father, something inside Emily snapped. She twisted violently, breaking free from Rebecca's grasp. With a shove, she sent her mother stumbling backward, crashing into the kitchen counter. "You don't get to talk about him," Emily shouted, tears streaming down her face. "You don't get to take everything from us." Rebecca stood up slowly, her eyes blazing with hatred. "You still don't get it, do you? I've already taken everything, and now I'm going to finish what I started." Emily didn't have time to react before Rebecca lunged at her again, her hands wrapping around Emily's throat, squeezing with terrifying strength. Emily's vision blurred as she clawed at Rebecca's hands, gasping for air. It felt like the end. But then, through the haze of pain and fear, Emily saw movement out of the corner of her eye. Eliza. Eliza was standing behind Rebecca, holding something heavy. "Eliza," Emily gasped, barely able to get the word out. And then, with all the strength she could muster, Eliza swung the object down hard onto Rebecca's head. The sound of the impact was sickening, and Rebecca's grip loosened instantly. She staggered, dazed, before collapsing to the floor in a heap. Emily fell to her knees, coughing and gasping for breath, as Eliza dropped the makeshift weapon, a heavy cast-iron pan, beside their unconscious mother. It was over. Finally, it was over. But as the sisters sat there, catching their breath, they knew one thing for certain: this nightmare would never truly end. Not as long as Rebecca was still breathing. And so, they made a decision. They were going to make sure Rebecca Harrington never hurt them again. Emily and Eliza stood over Rebecca's unconscious body, their chests heaving as they caught their breath. The room was deathly silent now, except for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock and the low hum of the refrigerator. The tension that had choked them just moments before had been replaced by a suffocating realization: this wasn't over. Not yet. Rebecca Harrington wasn't just their tormentor, she was a force that had dominated their entire lives. And as long as she was alive, the threat she posed would linger like a shadow over them. Emily and Eliza exchanged a look, both knowing what had to be done but neither daring to say it out loud. "She's going to wake up," Eliza whispered, her voice shaky. "And when she does..." Emily's throat tightened. Rebecca would never stop, not until she had completely broken them. "I can't live like this anymore," Emily whispered back, her voice filled with a quiet, desperate rage. "Not another day. Not another second." They both knew what she meant. They had no choice. The sisters moved in a silent understanding. Emily walked over to the drawer where their father's old gun had always been kept, the one he never used, thinking it was just a precaution. She opened it, her hands trembling as she pulled out the cold metal. It felt heavy in her palm, heavier than she expected. Her heart pounded, her breath shallow. Eliza watched her sister, tears welling in her eyes. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, her jaw clenched. "She'll come after us again. You know she will. We'll never be free if she's still out there." They had endured too much years of manipulation, threats, and control. Rebecca had stripped them of their peace, their sanity, and nearly their lives. And now they were taking it all back. As Emily approached Rebecca, still unconscious on the floor, she felt a wave of memories flood over her. The cruel punishments, the twisted lies, the constant fear that had followed them for so long. Rebecca had always won, but not today. Not this time. Emily crouched down, the gun trembling in her hand as she pointed it at Rebecca's chest. Her finger hovered over the trigger, her mind racing. Could she really do this? Could she pull the trigger and end her mother's life? Then she remembered their father, the man Rebecca had destroyed long before her reign of terror turned toward her daughters. He had died under mysterious circumstances, but Emily had always known deep down that Rebecca was responsible. It wasn't an accident. It never was. That was all the resolve Emily needed. Suddenly, Rebecca stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a brief second, confusion clouded her gaze. But then she saw the gun. She saw Emily standing over her, and a slow, wicked smile spread across her face. "You don't have it in you," Rebecca taunted, her voice raspy and venomous. "You're just like your father. Weak, pathetic. You think this will end it. You think killing me will set you free." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. Her hands trembled, but her grip on the gun tightened. "I'm not weak," she whispered through clenched teeth. "Not anymore." Rebecca's smile faded, replaced by a flash of fear as she realized that this time her words held no power. Emily wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. And then, with one last, breathless exhale, Emily pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the room like a clap of thunder, and for a split second, everything went still. Rebecca's body jerked from the impact, her eyes wide in shock before they slowly closed. Her chest stopped rising. The room fell into a heavy silence once more, but this time it wasn't the silence of fear, it was the silence of finality. It was over. Truly over. Emily dropped the gun, the weight of what she had done crashing over her in waves. She fell to her knees, her entire body shaking. Tears streamed down her face, and Eliza rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her sister, holding her close. "We had to do it," Eliza whispered, her voice broken but certain. "She would have destroyed us if we hadn't." But the words did little to soothe the guilt that gnawed at Emily's heart. They had just killed their mother. The woman who had given them life had also been the one to nearly take it away. The person who should have loved and protected them had turned into their greatest enemy. And now, that chapter was closed permanently. For a long moment, they just sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, trying to process the enormity of what had just happened. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft, golden light through the window. A new day was beginning, a day that would no longer be haunted by the terror of Rebecca Harrington. But at what cost? As they stood up, their legs weak and their minds numb, Emily and Eliza knew their lives would never be the same again. They had done what they had to do to survive. But survival came with its own scars, and those wounds would take a long time to heal. The nightmare was over. But the price of freedom was heavy, and the weight of that choice would stay with them forever. The Harrington sisters would never be victims again, but they would also never forget the darkness that had once consumed their lives. And they would carry that darkness with them always,